Well, we're here today with our sister Penny, and we are so blessed and honored to be having such a flow of testimony coming through our home, and just desiring that somebody out there who feels like they have no hope will find the same reality in Jesus Christ that we've tasted, and it's so precious. A lot of us weren't even really necessarily looking for the Lord, but man, He's so merciful, and His arm's not too short that He cannot save. But we're just thankful to have you, and you just feel free to talk about wherever a lot of folks start with their childhood, but wherever you feel led to go with, have your way.
All right, praise God. Yeah, I definitely want to start with the childhood because that there is the catapult, I believe, into the chain of events that had taken place. So I was originally born here in Missouri, and my mom and dad, they were not married, and they had separated. I'm not real sure about all the facts behind that, but uh, when I have a twin sister, and when we were 2 years old, my natural mother and my father had separated, but my natural mother had ended up placing my twin sister and I at my grandma's. My dad was off at the Vietnam War at the time, so this was about year 1967, and so we ended up staying at my grandma, my aunt's for 2 years. They cared for us while my dad was over in Vietnam. He ended up coming back and he met my stepmom. 13 days later, they were married. My dad went off to Vietnam again and did his second tour. And we ended up going off with our stepmom, whom we didn't know. And she cared for us until my dad had come back. Unfortunately, I mean, we were so young, we didn't know anything about our natural mother. We had spent 2 years with our grandma, our aunt, and so all we knew is that, okay, we're being taken away from what we knew into something unknown. And she was very strict, very rigid. And it turns out during that exact same time, my natural mother had gotten into a relationship with my stepmother's brother. So that made him my stepuncle and stepdad at the same time. So, but in the interim, my stepuncle, Uncle Bernard, he was extremely abusive to my mom. Of course, I didn't know about any of this during the time, but he ended up having my mom burn pictures of Wendy and me, and so she had nothing, as far as being able to any memorabilia or anything like that as far as us kids. But they split up, and he ended up marrying my Aunt Judy, and whom I did know, and so that's how I knew my Uncle Bernard was through there. But he ended up killing himself, and this really had an impact on my stepmom because that was her brother, and she blamed my natural mother for her brother's death. And so things were rough already. She was real strict, real rigid. She was heavy into the corporal punishment, heavy into the verbal abuse. But I mean, that just magnified times 10 once her brother died, and she blamed my natural mother for that. So my dad was gone quite a bit, and he would come back, things would quiet down, and then, he would get deployed, 6 to 9 months out of the year. So he would end up going out again, and then she was just real strict and rigid and just real heavy handed, and again, verbally. So we ended up moving from Missouri to Mississippi. We stayed there for a little bit, and then we ended up getting transferred over to Maryland. So I was between the age of 6 and 9. My dad again was deployed quite a bit, so my stepmom was in charge of us kids, and the abuse was just horrible, and it was just like Cinderella had it easy. I mean, we were between the age of 6 and 9, but we were required to clean, and make sure everything was immaculate. I developed a real severe problem at bedtime. I would just go into these real deep sleeps, and then I would have accidents in bed, and she would hang my sheets out for everybody to see. I remember just being mortified. I remember being told how worthless I was. I remember, well, I reminded her the most of my natural mother, And so she would always target me more.
Yeah.
We both were targets, but she would target me more and let me know that I was worthless and stuff. At this point, I had no recollection of my natural mother. She wasn't discussed, but I just knew something was off and I was a target, period. My youngest sister, Rita, she was born. She was 6 years younger than us. And when she was born, she was given all this love and, to just like, oh, I love you. And oh, you're just perfect. Oh, you're beautiful. And here, Wendy and I were treated, like these stepchildren, we never not going to amount to anything,
Yeah.
stuck in corners for an hour on end, just the chores that we had to do. And your kids are to be seen and not heard kind of mentality. And I remember one time my dad, he was my John Wayne, but we did something. I don't know what it was, but it obviously had upset my parents, and he happened to be home at the time. And he popped out the screen of the second story window. And my dad was not the typical the abuser of it was always my stepmom. And but he took my twin sister first, grabbed her by the leg, and hung her out the two-story window, and threatened to drop her. And I was like, oh my God. I mean, it just scared me to death, and it just the trauma of that. And then he reached for me. And I'm like, he didn't drop Wendy. He's not going to drop me. So, but I went out and got hung out the two-story window next. So, I mean, those were the kind of memories that I had, in that time frame. It was a lot, again, just the emotional abuse and it just read of my younger sister being lavished in love and it just don't touch her. So Wendy, we ended up resenting her. We just
Yeah.
got to the point just like, well, we don't like you. You get all this love and we get all this, hate and stuff. I remember during this time frame, my stepmom had told my sister, my twin sister, and she goes, why don't you two pretend to be mom for the day? First thing we did was went and grabbed the belts. We were going to whoop her behind. We were just, give her what she gives to us on a regular basis. And, uh, and then, and it just kind of like, you would think that would have maybe opened her eyes, but it didn't, I mean, things continued the same. I remember at that age, between 6 and 9, wanting to die. And that was one of the first times that I went to run away from home. I started packing a suitcase and my mom told me, she goes, you leave, you can go, but you're leaving with what you were born with and, no clothes on your back. And so she was going to send me out the door, plain Jane. So, and I remember that was pretty traumatizing. I wanted to come back here to Missouri to the family that I knew and that I loved and stuff. And I just always knew that something was not right. Well, we ended up going from Maryland, then we moved to South America. Things there in Panama, my dad was in the State Department there, and things there were a lot calmer than what they had been in the previous years because we had a maid there. Her name was Santos, and she just took Wendy and I under her wing, and she just loved on us. And she lived in with us and she would take us to where she lived and everything, which was pretty run down. This is when I learned about diversity and different cultures and stuff like that. Um, if I got in trouble, she'd have me read the Bible. She was a good little Catholic lady, and she'd have me read the Bible for my discipline. But I loved it because I was getting attention from her, and she loved us. And so for that 3 years, that was pretty cool. I got to experience, like I said, a different culture. We had a boat that we built, 24, 26 boat that we sealed up. And,
That's cool.
And, and then we'd take it out on the ocean and it ended up sinking. I'm sure it was probably my part that I missed a hole or something. But anyways, it had some pretty cool, experiences there. But there was a lot of fear there too, because this is during the time when all of that was going on with General Torrijos and the Panama Canal Zone, and there was they were always rocking and stoning the embassy, and us kids had to be kind of guarded, because kidnappings and stuff like that. So we were kind of sheltered in that sense, and but I got to experience the fiestas and the cultures. Our neighbor was huge in that, and they'd always have all these flowers, and so it was a really pretty cool experience there. After that, we ended up coming back to Missouri visiting. We came back every time we would transfer every 3 years to Missouri, visit Grandma and Aunt Margaret and her mom and stuff, and then we ended up going to San Diego and Murphy Canyon, and that there was a different culture in itself because it was a predominantly black neighborhood, and and it just, and a lot of the Mexican population and stuff were all stationed there, and I got along with almost everybody, thank God, as far as that goes. But then the abuse started to really come back into play. My mom, with my dad, would go away, he'd be deployed again for another 6 months or 9 months. And then, the Cinderella syndrome was real heavy there. I mean, the scrubbing the floors and the beatings and bouncing my head off walls, just anytime. It was just like, it was nothing that I could do right. She'd always tell me that I would never amount to anything. I do need to backtrack a little bit. In Panama, when we were 12, before we had moved to California, that my twin sister Wendy had been snooping through paperwork. And that's when we found out that we were adopted. We were 12 years old.
Oh, wow.
And my sister approached my mom and dad, what is this? What are you, adoption papers and stuff? And that's when we found out we had our other mom. And that's when it all clicked. It was like, oh, this is why we don't belong. We're not her real children, and things started kind of really, falling into place as far as that goes. And then, just in San Diego, that's when I started dabbling in the alcohol and stuff. And it just, for some reason, even at that age, we were brought up in spiritualism, and we would go to a different church here and there, whether it be a spiritual church, Baptist church, or whatever. And I was preconditioned to looking at people's auras and the lights above their heads, and just these different spiritual aspects and stuff. And then that's when I started drinking alcohol, started dabbling in smoking pot and doing all this. And then I started skipping school and just really just started getting kind of aggressive, in my behaviors and stuff. And just Wendy and I always had hearts to help people that were kind of like the underdogs, because we knew what it was like to be the underdog. And our stepmom, she would get jealous if we'd try to help a neighbor or something like that. And so we would get beatings for helping a neighbor, or reprimanded, and stuff. We would literally, because we were used to doing that physical labor, we'd go to the neighbor's house, and it was military housing. Her husband had been deployed. Her house had gotten totally destroyed while he was gone. She didn't clean. And so we're on our hands and knees scrubbing with toothbrushes and scrub brushes this lady's house, trying to help her get her house in order, because, couldn't have the house dirty. So, but we got in trouble for that kind of stuff. And that's when I started running away. The first time I ran away from home. And my bedroom was upstairs, and I jumped off the upstairs level and jumped down and took off, and I went to my neighbor's garage behind some boxes. So that was my first runaway experience.
Yeah.
I hid there for 3 hours, like 3 hours. Nobody could find me. I got better at it. But anyways, so that started the trends, and then I started seeking the attention from other people, and it just, I was drawn to the bad crowd because they were the only ones that would accept me, and and they had felt sorry for me or would even acknowledge me, and where the people that had the normal homes and stuff like that they didn't want anything to do with us, because they knew that we were odd, because we were just odd at that time. There was a time during that time frame, though, that I could see where God had blessed us and spared us, because in that neighborhood, it is just, there was a lot of riffraff and gang activity that was going on, and every single person on our street had their vehicles burned except for us. So we were spared as far as that goes, because that would have been our fault too if that would have happened.
Yeah.
So it was like, thank God. And we had a nice motorhome because my parents at this point, they had gotten a motorhome and they would take us away from the neighborhood every weekend. So we did have that kind of pleasant experience. But then when we did that, it was to get in and go and then be gone all day. They didn't want to, really see us or anything like that until it was time to eat. So we went through that, and again, like I said, that's when I started really getting drunk and skipping school and stuff like that. We'd go rob our neighbor's liquor cabinet, her parents' liquor cabinet, and my mom and dad were really big on their rum and cokes and stuff, and so I'd start drinking their rum and their bourbon and stuff, then water it down and fill it up because my mom was real big on keeping tabs on everything. She would keep tabs on the milk. You weren't allowed to eat any food except for at dinner times, and you weren't allowed to have friends over. You weren't just not to go anywhere. If you went outside, you stayed in the front yard, and then you come back in. I mean, it was just real strict, rigid. It was just like we weren't allowed to participate in a lot of the activities or curricular activities that other kids got to do and stuff. So, uh, so that's pretty much how that was going there. And then after the 3 years, we ended up moving to another area in California, which is Camarillo, Ventura County. And so there's when I really started getting in trouble. We had security that lived right next door, and they would listen to my mom bouncing my head off the walls, kicking me in the stomach, beating the tar out of me. And we had not too long before that ended up coming back to Missouri to visit grandma and grandma and Aunt Margaret and stuff like that. And my grandma had asked me because she could tell that the abuse that was going on. She's like, "Do you want to come back and stay with me?" I'm like, "Yeah." So I knew that there was a plan that was going to be made. But at this point in time, I can see where it was probably good that I wasn't the one that was selected to go. My parents said, "No, you're not going. We're sending your twin sister." So, and of course, that devastated me. I thought it was just going to be for the summer, and she ended up staying and never coming back.
Oh, wow.
So at that point, that's when, Wendy and I, we fought like cats and dogs. We knocked the snot out of each other, but nobody else was allowed to mess with us. We were real protective over each other in that sense. And all that was gone. That was my twin. That's all I knew, known my whole life. And now she was yanked and never to return. So at this point, the abuse at home just got even more horrendous. My mom, she showed no mercy, no mercy. And of course, my younger sister, she's watching all this, and sometimes I felt like she, was like, oh, whatever. And other times you could tell that it was touching her, like what's going on, kind of thing. But she always got the love and never could do any wrong. Even if she did the wrong, we got, the trouble for it, because we were responsible. So at this point, I started real heavy in the alcohol, started real heavy on the drugs. I started leaving the house and not coming home for days at a time. I started hitchhiking to different areas and stuff like that with friends, and just disappearing. I'd go to the malls, I'd rip them off. I'd go to display homes, I'd rip them off, rob them, break in, and just anything. And I ended up at that point just real severe anger issues. And then the final straw with my mom was she tried to throw me down a flight of stairs. She'd do the white glove treatment, and if she found any dirt or dust on her hands when you finished cleaning, you got beaten. And so one day she took me and she was ready to sling me down a flight of stairs, and that's the day I said, you know what, I've had it. That's enough. I picked up my fist and I busted her face and I left, and I didn't come back home. And during that time frame too, I was allowed out from like 7 o'clock at night until 9 o'clock at night, and if anybody called, then I was grounded while I was out. So, or if I was 1 minute late, I was to sleep out on the porch under the carport. I wasn't allowed into the house, those kind of things. And so I ended up leaving, and I started sleeping at friends' houses, park benches, and just guys' houses and stuff. And I had this one girlfriend that we just became really promiscuous, and we just ended up keeping tallies, and we'd have this board, and we'd keep tallies of how many guys that we were with and stuff. And it just, this vicious cycle, the drugs and the alcohol. And then it just got to the point to where I had to survive out there. And so the only thing that I knew to do in order to survive was to prostitute myself out, whether it was for a meal, a place to stay, or some cash to buy drugs or whatever, or for drugs. And so we were real proud of ourselves at that time. And we had a tally of over 300, and I wasn't even 18 years old at the time. So, of how many people we had been with, and it was like a competition between us. And so that there just fed into even, and the more I did that, the less value I felt of myself. I already had the real severe low self-esteem from all the abuse and, physical and emotional abuse that I had suffered, but then I started plummeting and plummeting and plummeting. And then I started hanging out with some pretty heavy duty drug dealers and stuff. I ended up getting myself kidnapped for 1 week, and where they took me from Camarillo up to Van Nuys, and then and the only thing I had to eat that whole week was Quaaludes and beer and stuff like that. At this point, my drug of choice was cocaine. I was a huge coke addict, and what was really bad about that is, that may not have been my coke, but you weren't going to do more coke than I was. You weren't going to do. I mean, I was just ridiculous with it. And I don't care if it's yours. You better split that up even. And it was just bad mentality. But I ended up hanging with people that had guns, and we'd be driving gun chases, stuff like that. In Van Nuys, they kidnapped me for a week. My parents ended up finding out eventually who I was with, where I was at, and they sent a message to them: you better return her or we're coming after you. So that, I mean, that was a good thing as far as that goes. And then I ended up being dropped off back to where my neighborhood, tuck, drop, and roll out the van door pretty much. So that was a pretty wild week as far as that goes. And then and I just, the anger issues that I had just developed. I mean, I didn't, if anybody just looked at me cross-eyed, I mean, I was throwing up fists. And I eventually ended up locked up for 3 counts of assault and battery. This one girl on her 16th birthday, she made a comment about a guy I was seeing, and I didn't like it. And so for her 16th birthday, she got a good whooping. So, and I've tried reaching out to her, because it just makes me feel bad, because that's a memory for the rest of her life. That's stuck. And I've not found her. So her name was Wendy. I won't say her last name. If you see this, I am so sorry. So, but then another girl, and it was the same thing. It always had to do with a boy. And her mom and her come out, and they thought they were going to start something. And so me and my girlfriend, we beat this girl up and her mother. So, and it was just kind of, it was just that cycle, and it just, there were many other fights and stuff like that. But I ended up dropping out of school and never completing high school. And I just hit the streets, run the streets, and, just really heavy into the drugs and with the drug dealers. And then I had really started looking towards the witchcraft again. And for some reason, it was just really, really drawing me in. And at this time, I was 17, and I had met my brother, who I had found out I had a couple other brothers. And his name was Chris. And I met him for one day of my life. And he told me about my natural mother, whom I had not met. Wendy was back here in Missouri, and she's now met my natural mother. And I'm like, oh, what is she like? And all this. And, but he was telling me how she was a witch and how she practiced witchcraft and all this. And come to find out, he is a pathological liar, and that was not true, but it intrigued me because I was already intrigued into the
Yeah.
magic and the power and wanting some kind of control. I used the moon, and I was real good at the manipulation, and it just the what that drew in, and being able to use the mind to be able to make things happen. And so I practiced that quite a bit. And just again, I was just out there on the streets for quite a while, a couple years, and just I ended up in a relationship with some guy, and I ended up moving into their place. He lived with his brother and sister-in-law, and so I moved in there, and just depression was just so heavy on me, and it just a sense of hopelessness, because he started treating me poorly and getting kind of a little physically abusive, and then it was mentally abusive and stuff. And he's just like, I quit. And, I had dealt with suicidal tendencies all growing up, but this just came to a point where I sat on the kitchen floor that night, and I'm like, I'm gonna die. I'm killing myself tonight. I'm done. I had a plan and everything. And that's when my twin sister, who was back here in Missouri, had called. She goes, Penny, are you okay? We had that twin connection.
Yeah.
And she's like, what's going on? You're just really heavy on my mind. Something's wrong. And I'm like, yeah, something's wrong. I'm getting ready to kill myself. And she traveled out here by bus to Missouri or she traveled from Missouri out to California to come get me by bus. So it was a 3-day drive, ride, and then 3 days back. So that's when I got to meet my natural mother initially. And so when we got off the bus in Winsville, my natural mom was standing there. And I looked at her and I'm like, that's her, isn't it? Before she even said anything. And it was like, yeah. So I thought that, oh, wow, cool. I'm going to have a relationship with my mom. I'm going to meet her, oh, life's going to be great. And forgetting that I brought myself with me 2,000 miles away, thinking, oh, because I left California, everything's going to be different. So one lesson that I learned very quickly is you take yourself with you wherever you go. If you don't do the changes from the inside and the work from the inside, then you're going to fall right back into the same things as what you were in before. So, but anyways, we ended up. She lived on the river, and my natural mother did, and we ended up staying there for a little bit. She had this cabin that really needed rehabbed, but my twin sister and I stayed in there, and we were kind of trying to fix it up and stuff. And for some reason, my natural mom was going through something, and she was leaving the guy that we were at their house. And so she kicked us out. Mm-hmm. And so my sister was seeing some guy, and we ended up moving into their lake cabin and staying there for a bit. And that's when I found out for sure that okay, I started drug seeking again. I was drinking that hardcore alcohol. I was starting to get out there and be promiscuous again, and a whole new I followed myself to Missouri. And about this time is this went on for about 3-4 months. And these neighbors of my mom's, they were Christians. And they were preachy Christians. They were just always talking about Jesus. And it's like, oh my gosh, I've never heard about Jesus so much in my entire life. I'm like, y'all shut up. Shut up. Well, they kept bugging and bugging and bugging and bugging. And I'm like, yes, I'll go to a Bible study with you, please. And my worldly self, I was going out the night before partying, and then I, ended up going to a Bible study with them. And, what was ironic is, I was not looking. I was not seeking. I wasn't asking. I was just doing my thing.
Yeah.
And I was just wanting to quiet them. And they kept talking about born again. The only time I'd ever seen the word born again was when I was hitchhiking to to Santa Cruz, California with my girlfriend, and somebody had that on their, that we got a ride with on their dash, the hippie van, I'm like, what's that? Oh, some religious thing. Oh, okay. So that was my extent of born again. So anyways, they kept talking about it and they kept using that word, and I'm like, it just, but there was something there though too.
It sounds like Nicodemus.
Yeah, I just think this presence here. I'm like, what is this? Yeah. I mean, I was brought up into spiritualism and stuff. My grandma was a minister. My great grandma was a minister in spiritualism. I mean, this was all stuff that I was familiar with, but I wasn't familiar with this. And I finally looked at this lady, Pat, sitting next to me. I didn't know Pat. I just met Pat. And I go, what is born again? Oh, she got so excited. That lady, she just swooped me up, took me into this other room, sat me down in this earth, fireplace. And she's like, oh, and she started explaining to me what born again was and started reading some scripture to me. All of a sudden, I just felt this presence. I mean, this intense, whoa, presence. Like, what is this? And she says, here, repeat this prayer for me. And so I repeated the prayer she had written on the back of her Bible and started reading it. Then as I started reading it, woof, it hit me. All of a sudden, from the belly up, I mean, I just started bawling. And I started not knowing at the time, but meaning the words that I was saying. I literally then called on Jesus, like, you're showing yourself to me, you're revealing it. And I just cried from the belly up. And I'm talking ugly cry. I'm like, the ugly stuff. And it wasn't like, oh, no, it was ugly cry. Yeah. And I kept crying and just like purging all this stuff out of me. And, just like, oh my gosh. And I tried to regain my composure. I couldn't. It was out of my control. I could not. So here I am going in another room, the ugly cry, sitting in the chair, going, ugly cry. Everybody's like, praise the Lord. I'm like, y'all, what's going on here? And I just kept and kept and kept. Man. And the next thing you know, I felt a hand on my shoulder. And of course, I'm like, yeah, like who. And it was just the lightest touch. And I look back, and it was Jesus standing there. He revealed himself to me that day. I guess he knew that I really needed that. I mean, that just solidified it. I knew that I was touched by Jesus. It wasn't like a fleck, but it was like a translucent, you could see through him kind of, but the color, and, he was standing there. And then just, of course, I even sobbed more because I met Jesus. He put his hand on my shoulder, Mm. So, I mean, that was just like, okay, God, I can't deny you now if I wanted to, it's like, okay. I was on cloud 9 for months. Afterwards, I didn't miss a church service. Yeah. I ended up moving in with this family. I mean, and I became the biggest holy roller there ever was. And all I wanted to talk about was Jesus. Yeah. and I did. And I did. But things ended up, the son and I ended up getting engaged, but that didn't work out. I mean, this happened for several months. And so I ended up having to leave. And then I met my other brother who I hadn't known. And he was visiting my natural mom next door. And he says, I'll take you to Colorado. And I'm like, oh, wow, I'll get to meet my brother. And, my brother's going to take me to Colorado. I never made it to Colorado. Made it to my grandma's in Sullivan. Met her for the first time, my natural mom's mom. And then he pretty much gave me an ultimatum: either you sleep with me or you're not going with me. And here I am, homeless, stranded, not knowing where to go. Yeah. And it is like, oh God, And then next thing you know, and then he takes me over to my cousin's house. And he does the same thing there. And I never met these guys either. And everybody's asleep. We're all in the same room. We're at the foot of this bed. And so then I'm destroyed again. I'm like, because now I'm feeling worthless. And then he tells me, after all this, he's like, I can't take you to Colorado with me, his wife at the time. And so just my worth and my value and everything just went down the toilet again. And I ended up moving in with my aunt at this time. And I was not in a good place mentally. And it was just kind of like I was trying to do right, but then just situations, circumstances, guys would, I would think they liked me. It became like this vulnerable, gullible or whatever, and they use me and then dump me, and I started to spiral again. And it was like, oh Lord, this it's like I needed help, and I ended up having to leave my aunt's because I mean she became almost impossible to live with, and I was working with her and stuff at that time. And then I ended up moving in with my twin sister, who lived in St. Anne, and she was married at this time to her first husband, and I met the neighbors across the street who were born again Christians. We became friends, and I started going back to the church that I had gone to, when I first gotten saved and stuff, and things were starting to get good. And, I was like, oh, I got Jesus back. And then my ex brother in law, he started getting really resentful towards my relationship because here I am, a holy roller now again in their house. That was not acceptable because they were big into the partying and all this other stuff. And so my brother-in-law ended up throwing me on the floor one day. Here I had my heels on and stuff, and so I lost balance, and I'm being thrown on the floor and stuff, and I'm crying, running to my neighbors, and I ended up moving in with them. So we did that. I did that, and then I was in church all the time. It was like, praise God. But then I tried to help and rescue these kids that, well, they were a little younger than me, about close to the same age. I was 19, 20 at that time. And I could tell they were running from the cops. I'm like, oh, I'll witness to them.
Yeah.
And so I'm bringing them in, like, shh, my roommates are asleep, and so we're all downstairs and stuff. And I did great at first. I was witnessing to them, telling them about the Lord. And then next thing you know, I'm going down to their place, and they're big and hitting the downtown St. Louis, the party, east side and all that stuff. And so I ended up again kind of swayed. I wasn't mature enough in the Lord, and I was stepping out of my bounds and ended up snagged back up again. And so I started the party scene again. I had to leave that place because, of course, I wasn't acting like a Christian at this point. I was running and getting drunk and running into people's fenders, and then, oh, what do I got to do to make this right? And that was not meant right, and it just try to keep from having to pay for the fenders and stuff like that. And so I went back out into the world again for a few months. And then during this time is when I met my first husband. And I knew I needed to get back to God. I knew I did. It was just like, oh, I knew that's where I was the happiest and what had happened to me, and I couldn't deny it. And, I wanted to get back to that, but didn't know how at this point. And so then during this time frame with this group of people, we ended up where my kid's dad was, and we were all partying and stuff. We ended up married 3 months later, and we were married for 13 years. But during that time, I got back into the church. I brought my children up in the church. I got involved in the ministry in the church. I did the vacation Bible school. I did the prayer team. I would go to the other churches and help with their prayer teams. I was on the prison ministry. I would go to the juveniles. I would go street witnessing. I was just into everything.
Yeah.
I did hiring, and scheduling because our church was 10,000 people strong, and we'd have these big guest speakers coming in, and I would make sure the childcare was provided and the staff was provided. I mean, it was just busy, 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 busy. And plus, I was the Kool-Aid mom of the neighborhood. Plus, I had my own cleaning business. Plus, I was the Girl Scout troop leader. And it just, I
Goodness.
was
Yeah.
on it, and I did this for 13 years. And one day, I started off great. It was all, I'm just doing things for the Lord. I loved it. But then all of a sudden that turned into works. Then from where I went from the grace, I went into the works and I started feeling like, oh, I'm not doing enough. I need to do more. I need to do more. And then to the point where I burnt myself out big time. So I think it's very important that when you do things, that you do it with a balance, and that you can't earn your salvation. And I found myself, I was going to the different sad mad clubs and to the high schools and and giving my testimony and leading people to the Lord. Everything I was doing was good, but it was out of balance way too much and for the wrong reason because I was literally trying to earn my way into heaven at this point. I had lost the message. And I hit the brick wall. Like I said, my kids were raised in church and all that. And one day I didn't cuss, I didn't drink, I didn't smoke, I didn't do anything. I went to the gas station. This happened all in just one day. It just, that wall hit. I went and bought a bottle of wine, bought a pack of cigarettes, and I sat on my porch, and the whole neighborhood freaked. Like, Penny, you're doing, because that was not my MO. I mean, they knew what I was like. And I hit that wall, and the devil just got such a stronghold in there. And I asked my husband for a divorce. He had his thing. He was huge workaholic. He was never home. I mean, he would come home on the weekends. We would do the weekend thing, but then the rest of the time, everything else was pretty much on me. And I mean, I was just burned out. It's like I want some help and wasn't getting anything, and plus overextending myself. And but that wasn't my fault at the time. It was not my fault. You could have asked me, I would have told you. But anyways, oh, and it just then I asked my husband for a divorce. I ended up I took the girls, my daughters initially, and we got a house in St. Peter's. I lived in O'Fallon at this time, and I rented a house in St. Peter's. Took my daughters. They were off the chain. They were out of control. They were chasing each other out windows and running. I mean, they were just getting crazy at this point. My oldest was like 12, getting ready to turn 13. My youngest was 8. And here I am trying to manage this. And they're like, oh, we're free. And oh, we don't have dad here either, to come home later at night. So it was just really, plus I was trying to maintain a social life. Plus I was working 2 jobs. And it's just, everything just got really, really just real heavy. During that time, I ended up with a severe urinary tract infection too, to the point where it was so bad I thought I was going to die. Bad, I mean literally. And I ended up going back to my ex-husband at this time, and then we all got moved back in, settled in, all the belongings back in. My health started getting better. I'd gotten the medical treatment that I needed, and then um, I I had, while I was away in this house that we rented in St. Peter's, I had connected with some guy, and I was just really crazy about this dude. He was bad. He was bad news, and I mean, the alcohol, and there's just, he hadn't been abusive to me, but I could see where there was a potential for it. But just something about him, I was just really attracted to him. I don't know if it was the familiarity of being used to being around abuse and stuff, and I was comfortable. But I I broke it off with him, told him I was going back to my ex, because of my health. And so I went back, we got settled in, like I said, and then I wasn't there a week. And, this other guy was still on my mind. And, uh, and I told my ex, then I was like, I can't stay. I gotta go. I gotta go be with this guy. And I walked away and I left my daughters behind. That, there was the day that I died. because I was very connected to my kids. Everything I did was with my kids. They were my best friends. Oh, my shopping buddies, we just did everything together. And for some reason, I'm like, no, I'm leaving them because something inside of me knew I was going into danger and I didn't want to take them with me and them to suffer it. There was a part of me that knew, but I sacrificed my children to go be with this man. And, I believe that was part of God's way of protecting because I was making a choice but it spared them a lot because this man was extremely volatile, very abusive. He would break 2x4s by my face. He would hold me up by my neck and against the wall and choke me out. And I mean, he was just extremely, extremely abusive. So that lasted with him for a couple years. I ended up losing my job because I wasn't getting back and forth to work. I was living out in Robertsville, and I worked in O'Fallon, and so from the alcohol abuse and stuff like that, I ended up losing my job. I did end up getting a factory job, and I was like, and I'd never worked a factory in my life. It was my first factory job. I'm like, I got to do something that I can make money so I can make my escape. So I finally did and escaped from this guy and ended up moving back to O'Fallon, getting an apartment and all that stuff and seeing my daughters more and all that. But then I had to endure him coming to where I was and telling me how he was going to kill me and, and giving me details and just showing up. So I ended up having to buy a 357 Smith & Wesson and sleeping with it at night because I just knew this guy was going to come into the door. I went to the police, which was 2 blocks away from where I lived. And they're, oh, you're out of our area. You have to go into St. Charles and, file a restraining order through the sheriff's department. I go to the sheriff's department. No, you need to go through the police department. I'm like, oh, he's going to kill me. And I believed he would have too. And I finally told him, I said, I'll take matters into my own hands. I'm like, no. And that's when I went and bought my handgun and I slept with it. And then I took it with me wherever I went. And I let people at work know. I said, if you see me running, look behind me. I need help because I didn't run. I'm running for a reason. So this went on for a couple of years. And he finally met somebody else. And when he did, then that really, that helped. I mean, I feel bad for her, but he got away from me. At this time, also, I was becoming a private investigator, and because I'd worked with the law office, I had made connections with a private investigator, and he wanted me to do process working for him, where I'd serve subpoenas and other different things, and maybe work a couple cases, surveillance and stuff for him. And so he did a background check on this guy, and he goes, "You stay away from him. He's to be approached with caution, and he will kill you because he's got a record." This guy that I was with. And so, of course, and then at least then I had somebody helping me and helping kind of keep an eye on and making sure I was okay. So then I had opened my own business for 4 years and did that. And my kids thought that was cool. And that was something that we did together. I would take them on, easy process serving things, no chance of violence or anything like that. And contempt of courts and all kinds of stuff. But so started building and reestablishing a relationship with my kids again. And then for some reason, I I had to get out of O'Fallon. I wanted to come back out this way. And so my kids are still there at their dad's. They're connected in the school and all that. But I end up coming out this way so I could be closer to a support system because I had nobody out there to help me. My mom and dad were out here, my sisters were out here, and I thought, okay, so if I ever needed help, somebody would be close to be able to, come to me. So ended up doing that. I was single for 5 years. I didn't want to deal with, as far as any real relationships. I mean, I was, again, doing I didn't invite you for dinner or breakfast, kind of thing. I was really hateful and just had this real bad attitude towards men, period. And, I figure I'm going to treat them the way they've always treated me. And, I just reversed the role on them. And I started bartending out in Sullivan, and I became the a great bartender. I've gotten Franklin County, 3/4 of it drunk, and and it just kind of just thought I was living the life, and then it just depression and stuff still kept trying to creep in and stuff, and so I would try to medicate it more with more alcohol, and then I would start popping a pill here and there, and then I would start, smoking some weed here and there just to take the edge off, and then it just things just kept spiraling, and then I met my second husband, during this bartending job, and heavy drinker, heavy drinker. And so we'd always get drunk together and we just kind of pacified each other. We lasted 5 years. I mean, it was just it was an awful relationship. There was nothing healthy about it. And so I ended up leaving him as well. And then at this point, I became very involved. I went back to school again to be a registered medical assistant at St. Louis Health College, College of Health Careers, and I started focusing on that, and I started dabbling in the witchcraft again, pretty heavy. And at this point, rather than just everything being mental, I started getting all the crystals. I started getting the witchcraft books. I started doing the tarot cards and started doing the readings with people. And I'd do the readings online, or people would call me, hey, draw my cards. I had a book of shadows that I started working on. I was a solitaire witch at this point, and but I would go to gatherings and stuff like that, and camp outs and stuff, and get ideas from other witches, and just have our little rituals and stuff like that. But I started getting pretty intense in it, and I started kind of like trying to woo my kids at this point into this. So I was doing a lot of damage, and I finished my schooling. I graduated with honors. I landed a job at Wash U, and you had to have a 4.0 GPA in order to work there, and so I was real proud of my accomplishments and stuff like that. And I stayed there for like 3 years, and then I was out the partying and doing all that, and then just subjecting to my kids to, again, some of my rituals, and um, getting them like, oh, here's your some crystals, and just trying to get them all involved. I was getting my grandson at this point like into the rocks and the crystals, and where he started collecting them and bringing them in and stuff, and it just breaks my heart because I'm in the process now of relying on God through the Holy Spirit to get in there and undo a lot of that damage that I created. It's been 4 years now since I come back to the Lord, and I'm going to kind of fast forward here. Depression and everything, it just was really just starting to grip me. It was just like nothing was satisfying me. Nothing was, and the more I try to dig and delve into other things, just the worse that I got emotionally. I was doing the Reiki. I was doing the just anything and everything New Age. I was practicing some of the Hinduism, the Buddhism, and the Akashic records, past life regressions. I was trying to get it all, trying to fill this void that was in me, which I knew in my mind was not going to do anything because I had that experience, so long ago. But I had gotten hard thinking, God, why are you letting all this happen? Not taking responsibility for any of my actions. And it just, I, I ended up, this went on for quite a while. And I ended up getting a job here in Union at it's now Compass Health, and I was a patient care specialist there. And I started bartending again, another bartending job out in Pacific, and that's where I had met Joe. And I started dragging him into this stuff. He's like, oh, you need to show me how you do this, and all this. And for some reason, God protected him because I would never show him how I did my spell work. I was very private about it. I mean, he would see my cauldrons, he would see everything and all the paraphernalia, but I would never include him and bring him into it. And it just, in 2019, we ended up getting married, in 2016. So we went through a long spell of that. And then in 2019, I had come down really sick. I was a severe alcoholic. I drank if I was happy, sad, mad, glad, just whatever the occasion was. It was a reason to drink. And so, and Joe put up with this. You know, he would drink too, but not to the level that I did, because I would get often blackout drunk. You know, I mean, I didn't have a limit. You know, if it was there, it needed to be drank. You know,
Yeah.
you had to drink until you were, finished. And then you went out for more, and yeah. And if you decided you weren't finished. And so, this went on for a while. And it just, November 2019, I'm just like, you know what? I'm done. I was right back at that place. I'm like, I'm done. I'm dying tonight. I'm like, I drank 2 bottles of wine, drank some beer, had a bottle of sleeping pills, popped those. I don't remember doing this, but somebody saw it on Facebook. And I had said, I guess I had said what I had done. I said something according to the fact that I was going to die. And next thing you know, I went to bed and I was ready to go to sleep. I'm done. I'm not going to wake back up. And I'm waking up, and there's paramedics, cops, detectives, and I'm like I'm coming in and out of consciousness at this point. And I remember one cop I was an avid pain pillar taker. I mean, I had a surgery back in 2015 and I got hooked on pain pills. So that was something part of my daily regimen. I was always on pain pills. And sometimes I took them just to feel better, not physically,
Yeah.
but more just numb. And well, he had my pain pills, which if I had been thinking that night, I probably would have taken those too. And I remember reaching for him, and this man was, and he put his arm back, and he's like, "You go for them pills again, like lady." And I saw that in him. I had enough mind to know that do not approach this man again. He will lay you out. So I remember that night, and then I vaguely remember going to the hospital, and it just I kind of remember my mom and dad showing up the next day, and they were like, "Oh, we're going to Branson. If you need anything, let us know," kind of thing. And it's like, "Yeah, bye." Okay.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So, but anyways, the cool thing about this particular experience is, well, it wasn't cool at the time. It was just the people in there that just grated on me. They got on my nerves. But there was one lady particularly that, because I was heavy into the witchcraft at this point, and she was a Christian. Oh, she sat across from this guy named Sam. He's getting ready to be released. Okay, he was in there. I guess probably the same pretty much reason that I was. I had earned a 9-day stay in this hospital. They weren't going to give me no 72. They're like, "You're staying." They could tell where I was at, and she's sitting there, "Oh yes, trust in Jesus, oh this," and I'm just sitting behind this lady, and I'm looking, I'm like, you know what? I mean, I was thinking these horrible, horrible thoughts. But the thing is the whole time she was talking, ministering to this guy, it was these seeds were being planted in my mind, and boy, I was bucking and rebelling. And I mean, I tell you what, if you could have seen my spiritual state. I mean, I would have been like, just this demon itself. And I just remember thinking, "Lady, shut up," And then she would make these comments to me, about, Jesus and stuff. I mean, just real short, brief. She wouldn't go preaching at me or anything. If she was at work, she couldn't, but she would plant them seeds. And I remember just this fighting in me. I felt like it was the fight for my life spiritually. And she did. She planted that seed. And I just couldn't get it out of my head again. And it was like, "Lord." And I fought it, and I fought it, and I fought it. They finally released me. I went home. I give me my cigarettes, so here I am smoking. I didn't touch the alcohol because I knew if I started alcohol again, I would be dead. I knew that I didn't want to really die. So I knew that that was not an option. So I stayed away from that. And it just kept And I'm like, you know what I need to do? I'm like, I need to volunteer somewhere. I need to give up myself and not quit just always being, all about me here at the house. I need to do something for the community. And so I found Pastor Carl, the food pantry. So I went pretty much literally from the psych ward to the food pantry, within a very short time. And then they just loved me back into Jesus, and it had just, I've been on ever since. It just like, I want more and more and more. And it's been the most solid 4 years, that I've had in the Lord. And I know better than to get caught up in the works. I remember what I did before. Yeah. And I know that it's by God's grace, yes, that through faith in Jesus that I am saved, and not by anything that I could ever do ever again. And, and I find peace in that. And I put myself in check at times because I find myself wanting to, and I'm like, no, can't do that. So, so I've learned how to be led by the Holy Spirit to do things and when to stop doing things. And it has just been the best 4 years ever. And I went to Pastor Carl's for a year, and I knew I loved the church. I did. I loved it, but I knew I was supposed to be somewhere else. I just knew it. So I went over to Mercy and sat in there and just observed and, and stuff. And I knew that was my home. I mean, I love Pastor Carl's church, but I just knew that this place is where I was supposed to be. And so that's where I've landed, and that's where I'm at, and that's where I intend to stay. And God's used me in quite a few ways. I've learned a lot of valuable lessons. I've learned, different things about my own personality that I had to work on, to let the Holy Spirit work on. And, I'm continuing just to grow and grow and grow. And I'm just really looking forward to what it is God has in store, for the future. So I just pray that this video, if it's just one person out of everything that I've said, that one person says, if they say, hey, if God can save her, he can save me too. And you know what? He can. There is no hole, no pit, there's nothing that you've done in your life that, God can't forgive and can't be covered by the blood. There are a few other things that I have, missed in this testimony. When I was 17, I did end up pregnant. And in the relationship that I was in, they did tell me that, no, that's just a reptile. That's not a baby. And I was so far along in my pregnancy. I was over 13 weeks, and that was beyond the point for a normal pregnancy. So they had to take me and drive me into Los Angeles. And what I saw that day was just horrific. And then the way they treated the people, it was like this assembly line. People would be laid on these slabs, and literally they would take your body sheet when you come out of the procedure, and one would be at one end, one would be the other. They'd swing you and plop you onto another gurney, and then leave you. And these women were just coming in like it's just like, oh yeah, this is my third, this is my fifth. Oh yeah, I forgot my birth control pill. I mean, it was just like this assembly line, normal everyday thing, and people were just treated like slabs of meat. And I remember that day there was, I don't know, I don't know to this day if this was an angel or not, but there was this girl that was just standing right there. She didn't move a muscle. She just stood there. Her face was, she was white as ghost. I mean, just head to toe, and just so still. And you could just look and see the sorrow in her eyes. So I don't know what she was doing. I don't know if she was just standing there silently praying, maybe, or what. But I mean, it was just like she was just mourning for all the people that were walking in and out of this place. And that marked me pretty good too, because that was a life. When I had my oldest daughter, I felt like, the Holy Spirit visited me and told me to name my daughter Nicole. But at the same time, I'm holding the baby clothes that I intended on having, but I was going to be thrown out on the street if I didn't have this abortion. And, that I had saved from a few years earlier. And I'm holding those same clothes. And I'm like, oh, so I don't know if it was a girl. I'm assuming it was a girl that, I had an abortion with. But just know that I'm going to meet her someday in heaven too. And I know that it's covered and that God forgives me. And He'll forgive you. He'll forgive everybody. He'll forgive everybody for anything. So praise God.
Well, thank you, sister. I didn't feel like to ask anything. You got anything? Thank you, Lord. Hey, God bless you. We love you.